Um, so anyways, so welcome to our back porch reading with Lawrence Millman. I'd first like to also introduce Coyote Arts Press. So they're in Albuquerque and a local press. And so we welcome Jordan and Leslie here as well. So I'll do a brief intro and then Jordan, you can come up and introduce Lawrence as well. So Lawrence Millman is here in person today in Placitas. He's going to be reading from his latest book, Outsider, My Boyhood with Thoreau, from Coyote Arts Press. So this is a memoir that's composed of vignettes that highlight Millman's outsider status, both as someone who loves the outdoors and as someone who is, quote, outside any known social group, unless you regard mushrooms, insects, or earthworms as social groups. And we have copies of Thoreau here at the book table, as well as Goodbye Ice, which is his latest book of poems, also by Coyote Arts Press. And a little bit about Lawrence that I have, and I'm sure Jordan can say more, but Lawrence is a writer, ethnographer, mycologist. Do you know what a mycologist is? I learned that word. Mushrooms, right? So anything about mushrooms. So he's made over 40 trips and expeditions to the Arctic and Subarctic. His 27 books include such titles as Last Places, Northern Latitudes, A Kayak Full of Ghosts, Our Like Will Not Be There Again, Hiking to Siberia, Lost in the Arctic, At the End of the World, The Book of Origins, and Fungipedia. That one sounds really interesting. And of course, the one we have here, which he'll be reading from, Outsider, My Boyhood with Thoreau. He has written for Smithsonian, National Geographic, Outside, Atlantic Monthly, and the Sunday Times London. And he is visiting us from Cambridge, Massachusetts on his book tour. So I want to give a warm welcome to Lawrence, and Jordan will be coming up here to say some words about Coyote Press as well. So thanks. Okay, now that you be up there.
So I'm Jordan Jones, and with my wife, Leslie Stahlhut, who's back here, we started Coyote Arts in 2020. I've done 3 presses at various times. Sometimes I get just overwhelmed with a day job, which I've gotten rid of now, so I can focus on this. And so Lawrence is somebody that I encountered in writing. We were both submitting to the same magazines about 35 years ago, as it turns out. And he contacted me looking for one of my colleagues whose press I had purchased years back. And I was looking to get started. And so the first book from Coyote Arts was his book, Goodbye Ice, which talks about the melting of the North and its impact on the peoples who live there and so forth. So we felt that was an important book. We're looking for books that are local, so New Mexico kinds of things, but also global in their impact. And so you can look at something like Goodbye Ice and say, oh, that's a book about the Arctic. What does that got to do with New Mexico? We're all experiencing the impact of warming. And this is another part of the world, but it still has a reflection here, and we see it in the weather that we see changing. So the most recent book that he's put out, we were glad to do. It's as you heard, it's a series of vignettes about his boyhood. And it comes after years of him trying to write autobiographical material and finding that the things that were most resonant were the things that were earliest. And so that, along with just his sense of the environment and his sense of being an outsider wanting to be outside, were key things that felt like the right thing for Coyote Arts to bring forward. So we're glad to have done that, and we're glad to have Lawrence Millman here today. Thank you.
I was initially going to start this event by reading a poem by my favorite poet, the Yukon bard Robert Service. And I thought, given the semi-Arctic conditions outside, it would be appropriate to read my favorite poem of his. But I've now decided to maybe read it later if anyone wishes to hear it. Service is unknown to his unknown in academia because he's not ambiguous and would never be taught at Yale University, much to his credit. But instead of reading Service, I'm going to start out by, very appropriate as well, reading a few poems from Goodbye Ice, which, you know, I am an Arctic aficionado, and, you know, I've been contemplating coming to Albuquerque in August, trying to fight the horror of the idea of, well, I don't like temperatures that are higher than 65 or 70 degrees. So Jordan mentioned 112. I'm recovering from the trauma. So I'm going to read poems from this book, which more or less covers not only climate change, but climate change has sort of a domino effect. And this book is broadly contextual and has my experiences of the Arctic, as well as poems on climate change in the North. And I'll start out by drift logs on Jan Mayen, which is an island I dare say none of you, Jordan is willing to give a free copy of my book to anyone who's heard of Jan Mayen land.
Is it up by Norway?
No. Well, up by Norway. It's owned by Norway.
Yeah.
But it's to the northeast of Greenland and just north of Iceland. So sorry, no cigar. Anyway, drift logs. From the sea's catacombs come these de-articulated bones, shuttled by Arctic currents from Siberian river to Jan Mayen's distant treeless shores. Each bone is a log shellacked to a primordial smoothness by the frigid fingers of northern seas. The most recent are a chestnut brown, as yet undone by the high latitude sun, while the oldest have turned a friable gray. And on gray shingle they lie, askew, isolate, or piled high. A graceful sculptural dream to those of us who are just passing by. And there's a lot of warming banks of rivers are caving down, often exposing unusual things. When our boat turns a bend, this is in the Porcupine River in the Yukon. When our boat turns a bend, I see the tusk of a woolly mammoth, a creamy white artifact from the late Pleistocene, emerging from an eroded cutback. Is it my imagination? Or could that tusk be pointing at present-day passers-by in canoes and motorboats and asking this question? How could paltry creatures like you have survived and I did not? Sandhill cranes, you familiar with that bird? It's one of my favorite birds. And this near Selby Lake in Alaska. Gliding south, a triangular congregation of outstretched necks and echoing bugle calls, circles above my head, not once or twice, but 3 times, making me feel more blessed than if a host of winsome angels gracefully flying across the sky anointed me. And sled dogs. This is, well, most people don't realize that certain places in the high north have concerts. The concert begins. A dog howls a falsetto moan, another follows with an alto voice, and yet another with a cavernous bass, and another with a high-pitched soprano. And soon the whole village is howling. Some dogs stick to the same key, others change keys, somehow plangent octaves, others rip the airs with sforzandos. Some seem to be howling Beethoven, while others Bela Bartok, still others oldies but goodies, and a few even Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. Yet each dog's howl, whatever the key or musical style, carries the same message. Oh, human master, let me pull a sled, please, or I'll feel like a Pekingese. And this is more or less, some of these poems are actually, I turned little stories that I heard from native elders into poems. And this I heard in Similigak, East Greenland, and I changed some words here and broke it off into a poem. Give me the moon. I want to play with the moon, cried the little girl. So her parents visited the local shaman, a man who'd recently turned a missionary into a muskox. But he refused to grab the moon and give it to the little girl. He even refused to grab it when the parents offered him a seal, even when they offered him 2 seals. For what's in the sky should remain in the sky, just as what's on the earth should remain on the earth. And now I shall use 1 or 2 others, and we will then segue to, here's the title poem, Goodbye Ice, Ancient Membrane of the Arctic. Goodbye, shimmering companion, who speaks and groans and cracks, roars, shrieks, and silences. You're melting into oblivion, and with your passing, the myriad lives you've blessed. Polar bears, seals, and walrus, amphipods grazing on algae, and lipid-rich zooplankton will become homeless forevermore. And the final one I'll read, which is a prose poem. It was mentioned that I am a mycologist, but lichens are in the same kingdom as fungi, and many of us mycologists have an interest in lichens. And this is entitled Lichen. May the gods of the tundra grant me lichen until I become lichen myself. Let me be a rich yellow nitropholous lichen decorating an Inuit burial cairn. Let me a foliose lichen stitch otherwise naked granite into a tapestry. Let me become a map lichen so I can read my own geography. May those gods grant me lichen, any sort of lichen, and I'll live on sunlight, dust motes, and the occasional drop of water, never complaining, never asking for more. Every 100 years, I'll add an inch or 2 to my character. A millennium later, I'll still lack all presumption and still grasp the rock of my choice with a full-bodied embrace. I tried to include, it was very hard to include roughly 40 trips to the Arctic in a personal memoir. It kept going off into all directions, and I kept describing those trips in details, which were getting away from me. What I really wanted to do is something I'd never done before, which was write about myself. And that was somewhat difficult, except when I was writing about my youth. And as one gets older, one's youth or childhood becomes sharper, just as one might remember what happened the day before. And so the focus of this little memoir, Outsider, is my youth, and it was a somewhat eccentric youth. I felt like I was outside. I mean, I didn't have any connection except to any social group, as it was mentioned. I could go on. It was not just fungi and earthworms and snakes. It was, roly-polies, which are actually isopods, which are crustaceans, which are, as are shrimp and lobsters, but that doesn't mean they are edible. Shrimp and lobsters are. And I had a revelation when I was about 12, when I happened upon a copy of Walden by Thoreau. And I ended up emulating Thoreau by camping out for a week in the family backyard. And I'm going to read you now. I quote Thoreau throughout in this because I find that what he says, and he also mentioned, as I implied earlier, about academia and Robert Service. He said, "What does education do? It takes a meandering stream and turns it into a straight and narrow ditch." I found a copy of Thoreau's Walden in the family library, and his account of living for 2 years in a small cabin near Walden Pond soon became the equivalent of the Bible for me. Indeed, I liked the book so much that one summer I pitched a tent in my family's single-acre fenced-in backyard, and I became a 12-year-old Thoreau imitator for a week. By the way, this book is composed of anecdotes, or as Jordan mentioned, vignettes, because that's how we remember the past, not as a continuous stream where one event connects with another, but as an incident here, a story there, and an anecdote here. And that's how I, in fact, composed this little book. I should say that I imitated Thoreau in some ways, but not in others. For example, we had very different diets. He ate peas, potatoes, turnips, beans, and still more beans. He was a passionate cultivator of them, while I ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, Green Giant corn niblets, Kellogg's Frosted Flakes, giant graham crackers, and potato chips, washing these food items down with bottles of 7-Up and Dr. Pepper. During my week-long retreat, I didn't take a shower or even wash myself. So instead of calling me, as he often did before, a dirty little boy, my father now called me a dirty little Thoreau. These words made me feel like I was friends with Thoreau, maybe even a member of his family. So from now on, I shall refer to him as Henry. A short distance from my tent was an old white ash tree. I felt a sense of companionship with this ancient tree, so I refused to climb it, lest I somehow wreak havoc on its serenity. But I did answer nature's call against its trunk, and it didn't seem to mind this at all. Also close to my tent was a large white mushroom, probably an agaricus species, another close companion. And as I later learned, I did happen to be close to the mushroom, for phylogenical analysis of DNA have determined that mushrooms, i.e. fungi, occupy a branch on the tree of life, surprisingly close to our own branch. Henry himself seemed to have been aware of this when he wrote, "The humblest fungus displays a life akin to our own." A speculation. Fungi, spiders, and snakes trigger a blinding terror, or at least a phobic response in rather a number of people. So might this have made me appreciate them all the more? For they were outsiders, just as I was an outsider. In the family garden, I watched ladybird beetles decorated with red and orange freckles scurry daintily up and down the branch of a rose bush. What pretty girls, I told myself, for I had no idea that some of these ladybirds might have been males. And also very carnivorous are ladybird beetles. Yeah, they eat a lot of other insects, and it's said that they even eat small frogs. So you might think they're dainty and delicate and sweet, but a small beetle might not. I often saw robins digging earthworms out of their homes in the ground. Several years earlier, when earthworms were among my closest friends, the sight would have disturbed me so much that I might have tried to scare away the robins. But now I realize that earthworms were as essential to their diet as peanut butter sandwiches were to mine. One morning, I saw a young, stiff goldenrod, Salatigo rigida. Do you have that here? Yeah. With bristly hairs all over its leaves. I thought hairs grew only on mature plants, as they did on certain parts of us humans. So I perused my copy of Walden, but found nothing about a stiff goldenrod's hairs in its pages. Well, I guess no one, not even Henry, is perfect, I said to myself. Later, I learned that the hairs collected dew in the morning and dripped it down to the plant's roots. The nearest approximation of Walden Pond in my family's backyard was a stone bird bath filled with water and mounted on a pedestal. During his retreat, Henry wrote, "I am no more lonely than a loon in a pond." During my own retreat, I felt no more lonely than a catbird or a blue jay splashing around in this bird bath. This is the next section. One morning during my backyard retreat, I began writing a Walden of my own. Only a few sentences from my Walden remain in my memory. A tall ash tree rises above my short life. My tent is a wonderful place. It has no motors, switches, or buttons. As the mushroom near my tent didn't eat me, I decided not to eat it. I also write a story during my retreat entitled Quivox and the Ghost. Its hero was a Native American named Quivox who finds himself being pursued by a posse of ghosts. Slowly but surely, they're gaining on him. Finally, he turns around and laughs at his pursuers, telling them that they're only ghosts. They're so humiliated by this revelation that they disappear. I gave my hero the name of Quivox instead of calling him Squatting Bull, Angry Wolf, Kicking Bear, or Raging Buffalo, because I wanted to celebrate the letters Q and X. After all, they were outsiders compared to the commonly used letters of the alphabet. I wanted to include another outsider, the letter Z, in my hero's name, but I couldn't find a place to put it. My story might have been my attempt to indicate how I felt about television and movie cowboys. These bronc-riding good guys in stovepipe Stetsons who spent their time killing Native Americans and outlaws struck me as stupid macho guys. Of course, I identified with the bad guys rather than the good guys. And concerning television, I go on a bit about that. I still do regard what I say here as a piece of humor. Furniture inside which a bunch of loud-mouthed miniature humans were being trapped. I haven't owned a television for 35 years, I'm proud to say. And having gone on a bit of a rant about television, and now I remember another sentence from my otherwise forgotten Walden. Quote, "How lucky I am not to have a television in my tent." I never found a companion so companionable as solitude, Henry wrote. Even so, he entertained quite a few visitors in his 10 by 15-foot cabin. In my tent, I entertained only a single visitor, a blonde-haired girl with large blue bottle eyes and silky skin who'd been in my English class the previous year. To me, she seemed almost as colorful as a kingfisher or a scarlet tanager. During her visit, the girl planted her lips firmly on mine and gave me the first genuine kiss I ever had. That kiss tasted like a hot dog or a chili dog. I can't remember exactly which. Shortly after she kissed me, the girl farted. "My ass made that noise," she exclaimed with an astonished look on her face. And shortly after she made this explanation, she said, "I got to go home now and watch I Love Lucy." Truth to tell, I would have preferred another fart. Henry believed rain had a fertilizing influence, adding that, quote, "the part of you that is the wettest is the fullest of life." I decided to test this idea. So one evening, when there was a heavy downpour, I sat outside my tent and basked in the rain while reading a book of stories by Jack London. I got so wet that I became an approximation of Walden Pond myself. What a nice feeling, I thought, agreeing with Henry. First my mother, then my father came out and asked me if I was okay. Even though I told them I was fine, they wanted me to come indoors right away, as if they thought the rain would either pummel me to death or turn into a raging river and carry me away. When I repeated that I was perfectly happy, they displayed their parental affection by dragging me into the house so I could become, as Henry put it, a sojourner in civilized life again. Thus ended my quasi-Walden retreat, but only that retreat. When Henry left Walden Pond, he brought Walden with him. And when I went indoors with my parents, I brought the outdoors with me. Since then, I brought the outdoors with me wherever I happened to go. How much time do we have left?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. I'll read you,
Or 10 minutes. Yeah.
or 10 minutes,
Or 15.
15. Well,
Yeah.
Okay, well, I might read the Robert Service poem then at the end. But at any rate, I pursued the rest of the book deals, first of all, with my inability to go along with almost anyone in high school. And Thoreau wrote, "I'd rather sit on a pumpkin and have it all to myself than be crowded on a velvet cushion." And I was a pumpkin sitter myself. And I tended to poke fun at anyone who wasn't. For example, the Beatles had become recently quite popular. So I asked a classmate if she was interested in seeing them. She nodded excitedly. So I showed her a jar with a bunch of beetles inside it. She shot me a ferocious look and tried to knock the jar out of my hand. Another pumpkin sitter was a pigtailed girl who blew her nose on her sleeve and then showed the snot to any guy who seemed to be interested in her, saying, "Cute, isn't it?" Not surprisingly, not a single one of the guys regarded her snot as cute. I didn't dislike all of my teachers, just most of them. One of the teachers I liked was my biology teacher, who once told our class, "Leeches are probably smarter than us, since they have 32 brains and we humans have at most one." It's a wonder that she didn't get expelled for saying this. And then I will segue to the last section. Flash forward the number of years. I was in Concord, Massachusetts, and I decided to pay a visit to Henry's grave in the town's Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, and thank Henry for coming to the aid of my outsider self. How does one thank a deceased person, you might wonder? In the case of Henry, the answer is simple. Although he died of tuberculosis in the year 1862, I felt he was more alive than most of my contemporaries. As I was, to use one of Henry's favorite words, sauntering around the cemetery, I thought of life rather than death. A crow gave off a loud caw at my approach. There were quite a few robins hopping around and singing cheerily, cheer up, cheerily, cheer up. And the viceroy butterfly was resting contentedly on top of a gravestone. There were also lavender irises, coltsfoot, sages, sweet ferns, bristle thistles, and a variety of mushrooms. At one point, I noticed a garter snake slithering among the gravestones. When I followed it, the snake peered up at me, and its flickering tongue seemed to say, "What kind of peculiar upright reptile are you?" Many of the gravestones hosted green shield lichens, elegant sunburst lichens, and fringed rosette lichens. How much better to have one's final resting place marked by the biodiversity of the natural world than by just a sterile upright stone with, as is often the custom, artificial flowers placed at its base. With so many distractions, I didn't begin walking toward Henry's grave until it had become too dark for me to climb the knoll on top of which his grave rested. But I wasn't concerned about this. "Pines and birches will constitute my second growth," Henry wrote. And since I'd seen a number of these trees during my sauntering, I felt like I'd been hanging out with him. "Thanks, Henry," I remarked to a tall white pine as I walked out of the cemetery. Thank you. I should now mention another reason that I found myself interested in Coyote arts. Coyote, as you know, was a trickster figure, and may even still be one. And I have had a long time interest in trickster figures, one of whom Raven in the Northwest and among Northern Native period Siberian, and also Wolverine, otherwise known as Quackwadjik, who was the trickster figure among the Innu of Labrador, whom I spent a considerable amount of time recording folk tales and stories. And I'm just going to read you one or two stories from Wolverine the Trickster. You know, this is a book, unfortunately, that isn't for sale, but you can buy it online, I'm sure. But basically, I want to describe or mention yet another reason why I'm fond of Coyote Arts. You know, it's Jordan had called the press hippopotamus arts. I probably wouldn't be here. See how much I want to read. Wolverine, as you may or may not know, created the world. Here's long, long ago, there were great floods. Almost the entire world was drowned in water. Wolverine was able to keep himself dry only by leaping from stone to stone. If these floods get any worse, he said to himself, they will put an end to my wandering, maybe even put an end to the world too. So Wolverine called a meeting of all the animals who made their homes in water. He asked each of them to help him save the world from drowning. And this is an ancient story, but it has a certain prescience pertaining to rising sea waters. First, he talked to Otter. Dive down, Otter, he said, and bring me some ground. Otter did as he was told, but he didn't come up with any ground. He said he couldn't see anything down there except weeds and a few fish. Next, Wolverine talked to Beaver. He said, if you bring up some ground, I will find a pretty little wife for you. Maybe build the biggest lodge in the world for you too. So Beaver dove down, but he didn't bring up any ground either. I can't swim deep enough to reach the bottom, he gasped. And as for a wife and a big lodge, I'd rather live without them than drown. Muskrat was Wolverine's last hope. I might be able to save the world, Muskrat said, but only if you tie a thong to my leg. Wolverine tied the thong, and Muskrat jumped into the water. He was gone for quite a long time. I hope he didn't drown, thought Wolverine. He pulled up the rope, and when he did, up came the thong without Muskrat. Too bad, said Wolverine to himself. This means only water, water, and more water from now on. But all of a sudden, Muskrat surfaced. His mouth was so full of ground that he wasn't able to talk. So Wolverine put his mouth to Muskrat's ass and blew as hard as he could. Out came the ground from Muskrat's mouth, more and more ground, heaps and heaps of it, seemingly without end. And this ground is the very earth we walk on today. But you didn't know that. Okay, I think I'm going to open this up to some Q&As. Thank you. Glad you liked it.
I'm going to stop on recording. Let's see. We're just going to go around. So thanks everybody from our audience, virtual audience, and join us on our next back porch reading.